Welcome to Blind Shovel, an arts and music podcast. Today I had the pleasure of speaking with J.F. Martel, writer of Reclaiming Art in the Age of Artifice and co-host of the podcast Weird Studies. Enjoy. Actually, I do find it remarkable right now. It's somewhat related to you that there's this damn wildfire smoke in New Jersey. And it's so insane. I've never seen anything like it. Even living in California, I've never seen this.
I woke up yesterday. I mean, I'm pretty close to it. It was real intense haze yesterday. It was beautiful. In the morning, the sun took on a hue of orange I'd never seen before, it was beautiful and yet just smelled like a campfire everywhere. I don't know if it's
exactly
New Jersey. Yeah,
exactly.
And I could actually, at the end of the day, I can actually taste the ashes in my mouth. It's pretty gross, but
Is this common?
No, I don't remember this ever happening. Maybe I have vague memories of this happening when I was a kid around here. But when I'm in Ottawa, Canada, and which is between Montreal and Toronto. And when I was a kid, there were paper mills on the river here, right across from the Parliament buildings. So Parliament buildings being the kind of Canadian White House, I guess.
Okay.
Right across the river, there were these big paper mills. So the whole town was kind of like smoky at that time. Those mills closed down a long time ago. But so I don't know if I'm just remembering that haze or if I remember this type of thing happening at some point. But yeah, no, this was unprecedented. I've read that the wildfires in Canada this summer are just nuts, just completely out of control. So it's a lot more than what we usually get. Yeah.
Yeah, it was almost post-apocalyptic vibes. I thought I didn't know what was happening. Suddenly the sky was the sun was like this beautiful orange.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And you could look at it. You could look directly at it. And then everything was just grayed out.
Yeah.
Very odd. Some strange type of Canadian warfare. Yeah, this is your only way. So
chemical warfare. It's
so oblique. Yeah, it's very polite. All right. So your name is it Jean-François?
Jean-François, yeah.
Martel.
Yeah.
And that's
Martel.
Because you're from... Okay. That's because you're from...
I'm
where?
a French Canadian. So I actually grew up in Ontario, which has a sizable French Canadian community. But of course, that was part of the Quebec diaspora. So I'm a Québécois, French Canadian, ethnically speaking. My family came to Canada in the early 1600s. So we've been here for a long time. Yeah.
What does it mean to be, I know what it means to be French and then I think I know what it means to be Canadian, but what does it mean to be French Canadian?
That's why I kind of mentioned that the years, because French Canadians were here a long time ago. It's still essentially kind of a medieval scene when my ancestors left Europe and came here, and so French Canada has developed a kind of its own kind of distinct cultural identity, you'd say, I guess, these days, its own culture. And so in the mind of a French Canadian or in the mind of a French person from France, there's a serious kind of distinction to be made between a French Canadian and a French person from France. So that's why if I said I'm French, it would feel weird because that to me is, So it's a little bit like being American as opposed to British. Same type.
Okay.
Yeah. And so the French Canadians were here when this area was called New France. the first kind of big colonial epoch in Canadian history. And then eventually the British took over New France after the 7-Year War. And then we had the really kind of unprecedented situation of having like a huge French population ruled by an English monarch, which was totally new. Mm-hmm. And so Canada, as we know it, is kind of the result of a negotiation between these two groups that in Europe didn't negotiate much. So it's funny.
It's funny to think of Canada as just a result of a negotiation, but that sounds
well. That's like typically Canadian.
Yeah. Apt description. I was just there like 2 weeks ago.
Where were you?
Near Whitby,
Ontario. Near Toronto. Yeah.
To see my ancestors, see my relatives. It was beautiful. I realized in some ways I'm just in America. It wasn't dramatically different. It's kind of why I ask. It's a strange identity, Canadian.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and Southern Ontario feels very much like the American East Coast kind of thing, you know? Yeah. So, but I don't know if you've been to Montreal or Quebec, but there's definitely a difference there.
I have. Do you have any relationship to your ancestors? Do you have like ancestral, do you feel any connection to that idea?
Yes, I do actually.
In a very literal sense, in a kind of like magical sense?
Do I have any practices? I wish I did. I have. There are a few relatives that I include in my practice. I'm a Catholic, so, and so I feel like I've got a few ancestors who are kind of backing me up a little bit, and I'll speak to once in a while. But I don't have any real kind of organized practice of connecting. I think this is something that has largely been lost in the West, and well, at least in our parts of the West. And I find that regrettable. I wish I did, but certainly family history is very interesting to me. My mom's family was very engaged politically. It's a family of journalists, essentially. And so there's a lot of history there, and they played a big part in, fighting for Francophone rights in Ontario, where Francophones are a minority. So that's kind of a part of me, I guess. And my dad's side is essentially kind of a working class family. But what they had, my grandmother on my father's side was truly a mystical person, like someone today we'd call like a psychic. She had prophetic dreams, all sorts of weird demonic experiences. Like she met all kinds of entities, and that certainly played a role in shaping me for sure. Hearing those stories.
How long did you know her?
I knew her till I was probably 9 or 10 when she passed away.
Was she also Catholic?
Yes, but my grandfather was essentially an atheist. He is to this day. I remember last I checked, he's 96 now, I think. So she didn't attend church, didn't practice, but she was certainly, I think if I had to try to like peg what she was, I think she was more like a spiritualist, really. I've heard stories about her and her sisters performing seances and that sort of thing. So I think that without being part of the spiritualist movement, they were kind of, they were just a broader kind of non-denominational, spiritual, not religious kind of thing going.
I only ask because there's that's a weird union, Catholicism and like magic-y.
You find?
Yeah.
Not where I come from.
No?
I mean, well, I don't know. It depends what you think of like petitions to saints and that sort of thing. A lot of that stuff is pretty much magic.
Right. And some of the saints themselves seem like, more of that ilk, magicians.
Yeah. It depends on, it's so regional, Catholicism. And in French Canada, Catholicism was practiced very, very devoutly until what's called the Quiet Revolution in the 1960s, when there was a big kind of revolt against not just the Catholic Church in Quebec, but also against the government, which was essentially operating like a kind of small tin pot dictatorship at the time. So the Quiet Revolution was the awakening of Quebec and the secularization of Quebec. Before that, religion was just woven into every aspect of life, and that was a good thing, but it caused new problems, of course. But the point is that what the type of Catholicism that was practiced, even around me, because I didn't grow up in Quebec, so I grew up in an area in Ontario where most Francophones were still practicing Catholics when I was a kid, and so a lot of that. Those old folk traditions were still around, and a lot of them really do feel like folk magic. In fact, they are. I think it'd be weird to anyone. Only a Catholic would think that those things weren't folk magic.
Right.
One of the things was getting water on Easter morning. You go to a spring in the woods before, like at dawn on Easter, and the water that you draw from the spring is like essentially like automatic holy water that can cure anything. And it's called eau de Pâques is what we called it. And so it means Easter water. There's a name for this. I think this is done in Ireland as well, but I can't remember what they call it there. So like, that's essentially a kind of magical practice. There are shrines in homes. I remember when I was a kid where people would do their rosaries and their prayers. And those shrines looked a lot like what you'd see in the home of an occultist today,
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to lay out like the roots of your identity, because I'm not even sure, like when you go to bed at the end of the day, what's your primary identity? What do you think of yourself as? Are you a filmmaker?
Oh, right.
Are you a writer? Do you not concern yourself with these categorical things?
I concern myself with them less now than I used to. This used to be a source of anxiety for me, because I've always been I've always had my hands and what's the expression? My fingers in a lot of pies, so to speak, or spread myself thin or something.
Yeah.
The point is, I always did a lot of different things. There was never really, I mean, for a while I was a filmmaker. I mean, I was a television documentary director. So I was essentially making film, but it wasn't my intention to make television documentaries. My intention had been to be like a filmmaker, a feature filmmaker. But the Canadian film industry that's a whole world, and we can get into that if you want. But probably best.
Is that something that was root, like as a young child? Was there the seed of filmmaking, or?
Yeah, well, I wasn't one of those kids who because I was in that generation. Maybe I'm younger than like Tarantino and P.T. Anderson, but the kind of like camcorder kids, like J.J. Abrams is my generation. And I got a camcorder because I wanted to be a filmmaker when I was 12. My mom got me a video camera, but I never used it. I think I was always a writer, and I think that that's my identity at the end of the day, is that I'm a writer. But I think that film was just an extension for me of writing. I found this out while I was doing it, that this is where I found the joy, and that's where it's in the dreaming, right? I'm a dreamer. That's my identity. In fact,
Really?
The writing is only the writing is just an extension of the dreaming. What I want to do is just sit in a room and dream. Like, that's literally if I want to make money in life, it's only so that I can afford some time to go sit somewhere and go into, just.
All right. So let's get into that.
Yeah.
What's so valuable about dreaming in this? Obviously, we're not talking about falling asleep and dreaming.
No.
You're talking about like
reverie.
Yeah. Divergent thinking, just like exploring kind of.
Yeah. Like exploring. Yeah, exactly.
Do you value?
There's this great
convergence, or is convergence like a burden of the process? You know what I mean by, like, for instance, I think I know a lot of artists, and frankly, a lot of them don't end up making art after a while, where they really, I think, enjoy that divergent process of finding all the ideas. But then that moment of like, I need to actually pick one, converge, and then
right.
I think some people love that moment. Some people that the convergent moment is just, the slave to the divergent moment.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. To me, that's a separate. I like the convergence. I like when things crystallize and take form, and I like even the process when you're just dreaming up ideas and all kinds of possibilities are presenting themselves, and you're kind of just in this imaginal zone. And I don't know, what are we thinking? Are we talking about? I remember one of the big frustrations of my earlier career was like, oh, I have an idea. Is this going to be a feature film? Is it going to be a novel? Because I wrote a couple of novels when I was younger. Is it, trying to find the medium was really difficult, or even a song. I was also a musician. So it felt like I was spread over too many different media. So I never knew where to put my ideas. And that was a constant frustration. But deciding on one and just going for it, that was a wonderful thing. I don't think that my problem is that I can't pick what I want to do. I'm not like a dreamer in the sense that I'm just stuck in that phase. Mm-hmm. To me, dreaming is kind of a convergence already. There's something in dreaming, in reverie, which doesn't need anything else. It's not simply potential for me. There's an actuality in there. It's its own thing. A great book that's all about this, I think, is Fernando Pessoa's Book of Disquiet. Have you ever heard of this? No, I think you would love this book particularly. Pessoa was a Portuguese poet. He had multiple alter egos, tons of different author names that he would use. And essentially, most of his work was just found in trunks after his death. The Book of Disquiet was found in a trunk. It was just tons of manuscripts, which are all connected because he's writing under these two particular alter egos in this book. The first half is one identity. The second half is another identity. And a lot of the texts are just about this inner space that a person can access, which is not simply a private subjective space, but it has its own objectivity, a kind of inner world or astral world that you can explore. And in a way, for Pessoa, the feeling you get after a while is that he thinks this world exists only so that inner world can exist. It's a flip. It's an inversion of how we usually think of dreams supervening on this world.
Sure.
He thinks of this world supervening on dreams. And that I kind of connect with. I often quote this line from Thomas Ligotti, who's a fantastic supernatural horror writer, American, Italian-American. I'm a fantastic writer. He, in one story, he says, and I think I've mangled this over time, but something like, the one virtue about this world is its capacity in certain moments to suggest another. In other words, like you're taking a walk and it's a shitty, banal world, but suddenly you see like a telephone pole with like a bird perched on it and this cloud behind it. And suddenly you're just transported into this other world. And it's when you get these moments of transport that this world is redeemed for Ligotti.
That feels accurate.
Yeah.
Like in the sense that, we spend, you taught about this. Was it The Moth, that one poem? It's kind of like,
Bishop.
You spend all this time just trying to get back to those little moments that are so few and far between.
Yeah.
I don't know how art relates to this idea.
I think art is about, I think art, like a great artwork is like one of those moments in the life of a person. Like I'm not talking about making art. I'm talking about like experiencing art. Like for example, that poem by Elizabeth Bishop, The Man Moth, that poem, what does it mean? What is it in my life? Well, it's certainly very close in kind to those little moments of poetic transport I'll experience on a walk. It doesn't.
Right. Could you say art is a more accessible version of that, in the sense that I think those are very, like those moments are very particular. If you're on a walk and you see this thing and it transports you. I guess in the sense, but an artwork you would expect to have more, what would you say? The ability to transport more people than just yourself.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the big test. Yeah. Like Deleuze writes beautifully about this. Gilles Deleuze, French philosopher, he says, the great challenge of the artist is to ensure somehow that the work can stand on its own, and sometimes it requires you to distort and violate what would be a realistic interpretation or realistic representation in order to make it stand up on its own. Sometimes it has to become like, for example, sometimes in order to express to you what my experience of, I don't know, Paris was like, if I just took snapshots of the sites that I saw in Paris, I'll just be giving you a kind of shitty, banal representation. But if I suddenly transform that experience into some dissonant music or something, or maybe a film set in some dream version of Paris where the buildings are all crooked, that might better capture the reality that I'm trying to get at than a faithful representation. So the artist has an experience, and then the goal is to somehow encode or give material form to that experience as sound, as image. But that experience is always of that type. I think it's always of that kind of zonal transporting type of experience. Like you're feeling this other world embedded in this one, and the artwork is like a key or a window onto that world.
Right. And do you think?
Yeah. Does that make sense? I don't know.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you feel as a writer, or the medium of writing for you over time enabled you to do that most successfully.
I think so. I mean, I don't do much. I mean, I used to write fiction, but I think I found that my voice was like kind of what I do now, which is more essays, philosophy of a kind. And I'm always trying to, and also a lot of talking, which I've never done before, like podcasting and doing courses. That's all new for me. But that's what worked, like you kind of have to go for the green light. This is what took off. So, I think that I'm doing nonfiction. I'm doing essentially a kind of philosophy, but my goal is to give people a feeling more than it is to like convince them of the validity of an argument. It's more like, to me, it's about giving a sense of possibility. So I see it as a kind of art project, even though it might not look like novels and short stories or poems or whatever. Yeah.
Right. So what is in terms of the daily life, what does that look like? Are you working on the podcast, which is Weird Studies, which we can get into, but what is I'm always interested in the daily rituals of artists. And I know you have 2 children. Yeah. You got to make ends meet, but is it mostly writing literally on paper? Is it typing on a computer? Is it talking for podcasting?
I've gone back to writing by hand. This is a recent thing for me though. A couple of years ago, I got into fountain pens, and my wife got me an amazing Japanese fountain pen for Christmas. It was that was my big gift. It was like a $400 pen.
Wow.
And this is it here. It's a Pilot Custom 823. It's a really great pen, very well reviewed, respected pen. Anyway, so when I got this pen, I got a few more since, I started to write by hand again. So I had to train myself because I was realizing that there's something about just the environment of like a computer, which is not conducive to like productivity for me at all. Either I'll write too much or I won't write at all. It's very hard to get into a zone where I'm just producing kind of like usable work, but by training myself to write by hand again, I was able to access something in me that it was almost lost. I don't know. It was great. In fact, I'm working on a book right now with Phil Ford, my co-host on Weird Studies. We're working on a book that's essentially a kind of like Weird Studies episode in extreme slow motion. So it's like a book we're writing together, but we take turns with the chapters, kind of thing. It's like an episode of our show, and I'm writing those chapters by hand. So what does the day look like? Well, I usually get up around 7, and then I'm with the family and the kids until they go to school around 8:30, and then I'll usually finish my cup of tea, because I don't drink coffee anymore, with my wife. And then around 9, I'll start working. And then, it's like everybody else. My plan is to write every day, but usually it's like a bunch of emails and stuff,
Sure.
and meetings and that sort of things. And so I've got several projects going on at once, so I have to try to manage my time. I work very closely now with a woman named Dawn Hillman. So she's started off as just kind of like, she was interested in the show, and then we started to exchange emails. She's actually great, and she's really helping me kind of organize myself, which I'm very grateful for. So we meet on Monday mornings, and then it just depends on the day. And then of course there's the podcast. So we record a show every other week, but we also record an extra, or like audio extra, for our patrons on Patreon on the off weeks. So basically we have to generate a show a week, and that involves recording. Well, first of all, it involves reading, recording it, or watching sometimes, and then finally editing it. And we each do a pass, and we have an assistant who also does a pass. Her name is Meredith Michael, and I just want to shout her out because she's amazing. So it's like definitely a full-time thing. Like I work all day, and then after dinner I work some more, and then when everybody's in bed I work a little bit more. So,
and are you teaching currently?
Well, tomorrow Phil and I are starting a new course. Just a 4-week thing. It's a view along of select material from Twin Peaks. So we're going to be playing the episodes, talking over them like one of those, like kind of the DVD commentaries from back in the day. And then we'll have little group discussions after that. So it's kind of a simple thing, but so that's starting tomorrow, just 4 weeks. And then I'm planning a big course in September. I can't talk about that yet because I haven't really nailed the topic. I'm doing a lot of reading. I mean, the biggest challenge in my life, I think, is reading. You probably relate to this. I think
I was going to say, the time, because you read, right? You're not listening to a book, you read.
Yeah. Oh, I read. Yeah.
Immense amount of. Yeah. No, I'm admittedly saddened by how little time I have to read, and how I choose what I read in some ways, because I'm not going to read like Gene Wolfe when I'm already stressed out by tons of work.
Right.
I'm not going to read challenging writing. So I hope one day, if it exists, I'm like 50 and I can just read.
I think, I get it. I mean, it depends on I have to read. So there's a lot of reading I need to do, and there's a lot of reading I really should do, sure. And then there's the reading I want to do.
Right.
And of course I'm never going to be able to read all that. So
isn't that funny? Like I always think about that. You go in a library, even a small library, and you couldn't read those books in one lifetime. And a lot of them are garbage, complete garbage.
Yeah. But even if you just stuck to the good ones, you couldn't. I mean, there was a time, in like, let's say the year 1350, where there were people who'd read pretty much everything that was available in their language.
Sure.
Certainly in Latin. Would you have like 10,000 books at that point?
Yeah.
Some people have that in their house now. And it's just a small drop in the ocean of available literature. So now reading is a real challenge. I think it is for everyone these days, but I'm just looking at the pile of books right now that I haven't even opened yet. And I bought, like, some of them I bought 2 years ago. So
yeah.
My house is full of books everywhere. So one thing I did that did help is I bought myself a reading chair. I realized that I didn't have a space dedicated to reading. So I got a reading chair, just an IKEA chair, but it's good. And then I tried to read I'll read a lot during the day here and there, but I try to like devote like an hour to 2 hours at night to reading. And that over time, you can get a lot of reading done if you just find the time for it, but it's not easy.
And books on the tape, or have you ever even tried to listen to a book? It's a strange experience, I think.
Yeah, I have tried like shorter books. Yeah. In fact, when I did the, I think you were part of that, the Neurolearning, the Orthodoxy one, the G.K. Chesterton. Yeah. That one, I mean, I have an old copy I've read. It's probably the book I've read the most in my life, most often. But during that time, I was doing like long walks every day. And so I listened to the book while walking. And I really like that. Yeah, just to review, just to experience it again in this other new way, and because you have different ideas when you're walking than if you're sitting down reading. So, and I do intend to, my friend Jacob Foster of UCLA, he's trying to like convince me to listen to the audio version of The Dawn of Everything. David Graeber, what's his name? I can't remember his Wingrove. Yeah. It's a big book. It's a kind of anthropological, archaeological book. And he's trying to convince me to do the audio version because it's like one of those 1,000-pagers. But if you just listen to a bit every day, and you can listen at like 1.5, you can change the playback speed.
Yeah.
And
strange.
Because you read a lot faster than you speak, or you listen to someone speak. So you can, if it's well read, you can actually supposedly increase the playback speed and still experience the full
That's
thing.
true.
I haven't tried
I've never thought about this idea that you read faster than someone would read. Yeah, that's. I hate thinking about reading when I'm reading. You know what I'm saying?
You hate thinking about reading when you're reading?
Yeah, and especially if I'm like thinking about, did I retain the last sentence?
I know, I hate that.
I get in this like weird loop. Very strange. Reading is very weird.
It is very weird.
It's probably why it's not going to even exist in like 30, 40 years. I don't even know. Like, I don't know where it's going. It's not like it was always a part of our humans' life. It's not even that old of a technology. I don't know if I would call it technology, but
well, it's old if you include like if you include like sacred writing in the priestly classes and that sort of thing. It goes back like 5,000 years, right?
That's true. That's true.
But if you look at just mass literacy, that's very recent, and I think that's on its way out.
Me too.
So I think writing will go back to being something that's practiced by a specific group within society.
Yeah.
And it'll go back to being, I think, reading has always been quasi-occult, quasi-magical there's this great scene in the movie Black Robe, which is a kind of a classic Canadian film about a Jesuit priest sent to New France and like sent to like evangelize the First Nations. And he's living with the Huron, I think, or the Wendat. I don't remember. It's been a long time since I saw the movie, but he's with this First Nation community, and this is the very early days, and he shows them, basically he'll whisper a word. I can't remember the scene now. I'm recounting a scene I can't remember, but I think he like whispers a word, writes it down, and shows it to someone else, and then the person reads the word. So basically he shows like writing is like kind of telepathy. It's a way of transporting thoughts
right
with marks on paper. Just kind of getting into this idea that writing is really weird. It's really weird that we're able to just look at these little marks and see images, there's something magical about that. And so you're right. I think people are reading less and less. I mean, unless you include like texting and reading, but more.
I don't think I do. Yeah, I don't think I do. In respect to, so it sounds like, you're not a wanderer. I don't know if that's fair, but you've kind of had a circuitous path. Is that accurate? And then on that path, what do you feel are the timeline accomplishments? Like when you die, there'll be a book, there'll be a timeline.
Right.
Yeah, I'm assuming reclaiming art.
Yeah. I'm hoping there'll be more
weird
than
studies.
That, yeah. Weird studies. Yeah.
No, I'm sure there are more.
Yeah. No,
I'm just kind of curious, like, if what happened was you found successes in certain mediums and then you said, well, I should probably pursue that more, or if you kind of have the opposite effect, you find that this book works, but then you're kind of satisfied and you say, well, maybe I want to do a different thing with that same focus.
Right. I think that as I've grown older, I've become much more focused on the one thing. In my 20s, as I was saying earlier, I was in bands. So I was a songwriter, and I was originally a drummer. Then I stopped playing drums and I was doing guitar and singing. And I did that. I was also making films and aspiring to make films, writing films and directing short films. I had written 2 novels by the time I was 21. The first one is just unreadably bad. The second one is just almost as
What
bad.
are they called?
The first one, I don't even want to tell you the titles of these. The second one was called Star Puppets, which I've always liked. I like that title.
Oh, I'm seeing all sorts of funny things. I like not knowing about it, but I like knowing the name Star Puppets. And you won't tell me the first book.
The first book, I'm trying to remember what title I settled on at the end. I think it was called The Blind Circuit.
Okay.
It's like a name without, there's no imagery there. It's just nothing. It's just like, it was
Blind Circuit.
It was an attempt to, it's so abstract, but the book was, I don't know, I was 19 when I wrote. I remember I wanted to beat Mary Shelley because I knew she'd written a book at 19 and I wanted to make sure that I at least matched that. It's like, it doesn't need to be good. I just need to finish it. And so I did, but it was kind of riffing off of Naked Lunch at the time. I was really into William Burroughs and Henry Miller and that sort of stuff.
Okay. No, I find the embarrassing early stuff is a very distilled, there's something there that tells you a lot.
It's all there, really.
Yeah.
You know,
and then you're just trying to sort through that or hide that in some kind of more eloquent way where it's like. So anyway, I don't want to derail you, but you got those 2 books.
So there were those. I'm just trying to express that I was going to university and studying and thinking maybe I want to be an academic. So I was really spread thin. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was just trying different things and trying to find out, well, if I just keep throwing balls, somebody's going to throw one back at some point. But it was just, I just felt like I was like, you know, whacking the tennis ball into the dark and nothing was ever coming back, just picking up more balls.
Yeah, sure.
And then, but then some of the things were, it's not like I wasn't getting anywhere. I had a couple of bands that were pretty good, I think. I made some good short films. They showed in film festivals, but I never had the drive. I was always waiting for somebody to say, all right, come this way, do this. Almost like I needed a direction a little bit. I was pushing myself along, but then I'd get distracted and interested in something else and I changed directions. And it was very frustrating until I wrote this one essay for Reality Sandwich at the time. I don't know if you remember. So Reality Sandwich was an online magazine. I think it was like the year, like 2000, around 2000 to 2003 to 2012 was its kind of apogee, I think. And they were publishing all kinds of stuff about consciousness and psychedelics. It was started by Daniel Pinchbeck, who wrote a book about 2012 and a very good book on psychedelics called Breaking Open the Head. And so I was really into that sort of thing in the early 2000s and had read Pinchbeck's work. I was very interested in all that, Terence McKenna and that sort of thing. So I came to all that a little later. And in my life, you know, because at this point, I was in my late 20s, early 30s. And then one day I just decided to pitch an article to them. And I hadn't written an essay since college, which I stopped going to college in 2000. So this was a few years later, like 6 years later. And they took it. It was on Kubrick. It's on Stanley Kubrick as a shamanic filmmaker, as a kind of like psychedelic filmmaker, which today sounds obvious, but at that time that didn't. Kubrick was at that time was very much in the kind of an established kind of someone. People who read the New Yorker like Kubrick. It wasn't associated anymore. He had been in the 60s, but he was no longer associated with the counterculture, quote unquote, so to speak. So they took it, and I wrote this piece called The Kubrick Gaze, and it did really well. And then Reality Sandwich, or Daniel Pinchbeck, started an imprint with North Atlantic Books to publish stuff that of the type that they were publishing on Reality Sandwich, and they invited me to. They first of all, they put my Kubrick Gaze article in a book. That book was published by Penguin-Tarcher. And then they invited me to submit something for this new line of manifestos they were releasing. And at that time, I'd written a few pieces for Reality Sandwich, and I just really, really liked the form of nonfiction. Like nonfiction, I don't like that term, of just essay writing, thinking, philosophy. I'd always been interested in philosophy. I remember this was one of the biggest problems I had in my 20s was I kept thinking I should stop reading philosophy. I should be an artist. You can't be a philosopher and an artist. They don't mix. I thought if you're a philosopher, you're just basically sabotaging those parts of yourself that need to be not thinking and just creating. It was a big conflict. And at that point, so then I submitted what became Reclaiming Art, and that was the ball that got thrown back. So that book came out. Publisher did very little in the manner of publicity, like nothing. And yet the book found readers. I met Phil Ford that way. All kinds of everything started opening up, and suddenly I started the podcast, and that's what eventually just worked. So it could have been the film, it could have been one of the other projects, but that's the one that did it. So so now I'm very focused on that path.
And where do you imagine that path leads?
Where do I imagine it leads? I don't know.
I asked
nowhere.
Yeah, I don't think everyone ponders things of this nature.
I do.
But
I used to. I'm just realized I'm kind of shocked that I don't have an answer for you. There are books I want to write. That's all I know. Yeah.
Like books, like thick books.
No, thin little books.
Yeah,
I was working on a thick book, which is why I haven't published anything since, like anything of substance since that book. It's because I was working on this big ass book called Groundwork for Philosophy of Magic, which I now realize I would hate the author of this book if I saw it sitting on. I bought a book recently. Well, there's that Graeber book I was talking about, The Dawn of Everything. It's like nothing needs to be this long. I've been getting into this one philosopher. His name is Byung-Chul Han. He's a Korean German philosopher, and
I think you sent me a book, the one about ritual, the disappearance of ritual.
Right, disappearance of ritual. Yeah. He writes these beautiful, tiny little books in the style of the 17th century philosophers who would write very small books. Leibniz and people like that. Thomas Brown. And so I love that. And I've really grown very fond of that form. So what I'm doing now is actually writing a bunch of smaller books, which can be published individually. And this is a recent discovery. So this should really increase my output over the next few years because I've got so much material. There's all kinds of developments I can't be talking about right now that are happening, which are changing everything. So I see a big potential coming up. Like I'm already in it. But it's hard to define what that will look like. But what I want it to look like is more time to write. That's what I need, is more time to write. And so the financial means to take the time to write. So bigger deals, bigger advances, that sort of thing. Okay. Just to afford the time I need. Yeah. That's my goal.
That makes sense. I think I'm always interested in growth from the artist perspective, not from like the, businessman's perspective, because can be really quite abstract, but I find most artists know when it's happening. They might not always be able to communicate the benchmarks per se. But contrast that with the kind of interesting, there's that kind of nebulous abstract growth, but then there's also like that very human and real response that comes from when someone likes your stuff.
Yeah.
Like all of this, because there's this propensity in artists to be like, I don't give a fuck what anyone thinks.
Right. That's
truth. Well, I think it's quite rare that people feel that way. They usually mean, I don't care what this particular person thinks or that particular group, but it's interesting to me that, all it takes is one person to receive it. Like you said, you wrote this little thing and then boom, it works. And I think when I was younger, I thought that was like a weak position or something to need that. I don't feel that way anymore.
No, but I think I agree with you 100%. There is validity. You need to tell yourself that to a certain, because you kind of have to not care at first, because you have to do what you can't be creating for this imaginary audience that you think will like what you do. What's so gratifying is when somebody likes something that you made and you didn't make it for them. You just made it because that's how it needed to be. And suddenly people like it. That's the validity. It's not the satisfaction of like somebody who works at a marketing agency and does all this focus group work and research and then comes up with a detergent commercial that actually sells the detergent.
Yeah.
It's not like that. That would be more of the business type. It's more like, man, I did this. It was a dream. It was something that existed only for me. And now people get it. And that's the big thing. And like, that's what's so satisfying, is that I was being honest and it's being heard. That is a feeling that's a beautiful thing. And so it's a weird combination of the two attitudes. On the one hand, you can't care what people think. On the other hand, you hope that they will like it, despite the fact that you didn't care what they thought. And
I always use it. It's a piston. There's some kind of weird.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's endless.
I'm curious about your experience and if you've talked about this with other guests of yours, let me know and we can just move to something else. But so you're an artist and now you're running an art center. So how does that feel on your path? Does that feel like, because I don't know, I'll just, before you answer, Neil Gaiman, Neil Gaiman, the fantasy writer. Yeah. So he gave a commencement speech once that I really like. I thought it was a great commencement speech for young people graduating from an art school somewhere, an art college. And he has this thing about the mountain. When you start life as a freelancer, as an artist who's trying to like just really determined to make it in their medium. So he's like, imagine a mountain and what's at the top of that mountain. Maybe it's like, whatever it is you envision you need to go, what you want to become, who you want to emulate, what you want to be, what you want your life to be like, ultimately. It's kind of the question you've been asking me. And then whenever a fork in the path comes up, you always ask yourself, will going this way bring me closer to the mountain or further? I mean, he says it much better than this. The point is that did this opportunity, this thing you're doing now with the Williams Center, do you feel that is this a kind of unexpected turn, or does this feel right for you? And or does it feel like a new thing? Yeah, both, right?
Yeah, both. I mean, at a certain point, I realized like I thought I was a drawer. Stupid word, but drafts. I mean, I don't call myself a draftsman because it invokes this very technical individual.
Penciler?
Yeah. So I realized at a certain point, maybe like the way you realize with the writing, that drawing for me is just a means to an end, and that end can be so many things. And so once I broke through that, it opened me up to different ways of making, like whether it's fabrication, furniture making, the art center, curation, etc. And
you just said furniture making, curation, and administration as just like
it's
things you can do with your drawing skill. That's pretty cool.
I think they're related.
I totally get it. Yeah.
For me, I was talking to my priest, and this is something new for me, talking to a priest. There's a funny Gurdjieff quote: "If you want to lose your faith, make friends with a priest." I think it's that. And we were talking about like natural family planning, right? Which I'm yet to understand. But what is so shocking to me is, I guess maybe it's the idea of grace, but this idea of surrendering to life or God's will or God's plan, or if you're more of a hippie, it's the universe.
Yeah.
I'm a very goal-oriented person who plans a lot. And so, but at a certain point in my life, I think I did embrace the notion of that, whatever that is. I still don't actually get it. I think my mind maybe isn't configured to be like that gracious, like full surrender to life. I'm still trying to get it, but I think there's that aspect for me. Like, I'm called to do things, I believe. Yeah. I think most people are. I think people who have problems with this, do I have a calling, etc., they're getting in the way of being told what that thing is. They think they can project it with their will and it's their path, but I don't think that's how it works for me. And although I have great respect, I say this all the time on the podcast, for like Miyazaki or someone who can take manga and do it their whole life. Yeah. And they're just like so rigidly on this path. I think they're superior to me. Yeah. Those individuals.
I agree. I feel
but there feels like there's not a life lived there. And so maybe they're martyrs of art, and maybe I'm more selfish. Like,
it's very,
I like like, as much as I struggle with it, I like humanity, and drawing in a room wasn't enough. So there's a practicality to the decisions made, but still I feel called to, like, I have an opportunity that's just so surreal and remains surreal. I also like narrative quirks. Like, I like, and this could be a flaw, but I like the idea of thinking of my life detached and in a book. And there's something cool about someone who made comics for 8 years and then suddenly they're running an art center. But there's something very uncool about someone who just makes comics for, despite what I just said, for 60 years straight. I'm like tied to the narrative of my life.
I know what you mean. I think that's good. To look at your life as a kind of story and to go, well, even when you experience a bad turn, like something shitty happens, and you think, well, that does make for a good story, though, doesn't it? That this happened. So
but you can do some
really
very
good?
You can do some very fucking irresponsible, crazy shit with that.
Which I'm sure we've both done. But the thing is, I love what you're saying about grace. I really believe that. I live by that. There was a point in my life where I really kind of just discovered that I had faith. I fought against it. I hated the fact that it was happening, kind of like Jonah, getting swallowed by the whales. He doesn't have to go to Nineveh or whatever. And finally just kind of gave up, surrendered to it. And that coincides with the moment that stuff started happening for me, professionally. Almost like I was getting in my own way before that. And I'm not being like, it wasn't like a road to Damascus thing, like faith. It was just like a kind of trust in the world that I didn't have before. It took.
I wish I could. I wish I could speak of very overt visions, like William Blake, or even people in the course you taught. There were people like, I was talking shit on an atheist forum, and I remember one guy said this, and then like a voice spoke to me, and like, I don't have this. I think again, people think a calling is like that. Like someone's like, "Yo, this is what you got to do now." Yeah, like Noah or something.
Some people experience, or Paul. Some people do experience that.
I would agree. My thing is the same. It's like, it is, yeah, that's all. It sounds amazing, but probably also torturous. But I would agree. Mine is very subtle, like yours. It's like a finer feeling where sometimes I describe it as a tautness in the head, or like a tautness in general, I would say, in life. And that's all. And you can barely tell if it's, if you're on the path almost.
Yeah.
I don't know how to say it. Yeah.
I know exactly what you mean. And it's like, it's moment to moment sometimes. Like, yeah, I did have a pretty dramatic experience with ayahuasca, in which, I mean, I was basically asking for it at that point, but I did get some intense visionary experiences there, which play into all this. But
so this was before the graceful surrender?
No, this was part of it. This was all part in the same period. There was no one moment. It was just over a period of a few years, as I realized that my then girlfriend, now wife, and I were going to be having children. I had a kind of crisis. This is before she wasn't pregnant. None of that. We were moving into our 30s, and I was like, okay, things are getting serious. What have I done? I've been a bohemian for 12 years now. And so it's just kind of a crisis. What's my purpose? What's my use? What use does the world have for me? And that's what, and all these things happen in the context of this kind of moment of crisis. And then one day, it wasn't so much experiencing something as waking up and realize that something had happened. I didn't even realize it. I already believed, I already had this trust, like it was already given to me. And from there, it was like much smoother. This is after I started writing though. But after that, then the book came, and we moved from Toronto to Ottawa. That was and things calmed down, things focused, things were, I don't know, just changed things. And it's been less of a struggle since then. For me personally. Yeah. I would agree. Yeah. So it's just like, follow the green light is an expression I use for that. It's like, well, light's green over there, so let's go there. And, I like to just take things as they come, but I would be lying if I said that I'm just satisfied doing that. I do have like a few books I want to write. And it's very important. If I think of the possibility that I might die like tonight, not having written these books, it's not a good feeling. Yeah, no, I have the same willful struggle with life. Mm-hmm. As on my Chevy Impala, I have man proposes, God disposes. And that's basically, for me, that's what I do. I propose. Yeah. Over and over and over, and most of them get disposed. But some of them don't.
But it doesn't mean you shouldn't be proposing all the time, No, right. That's the graceful thing to me, is like the lack of shame and humiliation at trying or being something. And then just having I don't know if it's no expectations, but knowing I do feel life is absurd and surreal at times. Again, I don't know how that wrestles and tangles with Catholicism, because I don't know if that's compatible, Well, there's that great moment in the Garden of Gethsemane when this is like the night before he's going to be tortured and killed, right? Jesus is in the garden and he's having kind of a panic attack, sweating blood, and just basically losing his cool. And he says, how does he put it? It's like something like, if it be thy will, take this cup from me, but thy will be done. There's like two things he's saying there. It's like, if it's okay, please take this away from me. Don't make me do what I know I have to do. Please do something, universe, God, so that this doesn't happen. But if this must happen,
then I fully accept it. It's kind of a weird double.
Yeah.
It's like, this is what I want. This is what my ego wants. This is what myself wants. But ultimately, that's my proposal. But I will accept your disposition, no matter what. And
exactly.
Yeah. So
that's again. That feels like a very accurate description of life, or even making. I feel like making things brought me back. For me, the process of making,
like making furniture, making
even art,
decorating. Because I know you've been doing a lot of interior design, that sort of thing. That
brought me back to humanity, but making brought me back to a relationship with the divine, I would say.
Right.
Because I believe it's recursive. I just believe it's a way to slightly understand that which begets life.
Yeah. Well, that's Tolkien. Yeah. Have you read Tolkien's J.R.R. Tolkien's essay on fairy stories?
No,
it's really worth it. And he talks about what he calls sub-creation. He's like, artists are often called creators. Really what they are is sub-creators. What we are when we create worlds was we're engaging in the process that made us, that created us. Of course, the difference is that the process that created us had no pre-existing material. It was like big bang, right? It just came out of nowhere. But we're sub-creators, but in sub-creation, there's something innately spiritual about that. When you're making something, it doesn't need to be like sculpting.
Make anything.
Anything. It could be making like baking. It could be making furniture. It could be making whatever it is that you want to make. There's something. The Greek word for that is poiesis, which is where we get the word poetry. But in Greek, it just meant making something.
And I think what's interesting is the artists struggle with the idea that they are the god. I think that was a big problem I had. Not even the god, even a god, not a sub.
The kind of romantic thing you mean? Like this kind of ideal. Yeah.
It's, I believe it's actually the cause of the most dangerous pitfalls of being like an artist in contemporary society. Is that almost Luciferian, not almost, it's straight up Luciferian framework that the artist falls into, that society often places them within. If you think about, music shows are far more relevant and ecstatic than church. Yeah. So I get why they get confused, but that was a big moment for me, realizing like, oh no, I'm not at that point. I'm definitely sub in many ways, way beneath. That's a very important realization, I think.
That you're not a god?
You're not a god. You're not. You're not. And it's actually like, I don't pretend to understand aspects of Zen or Buddhism. But it seems like some people in the West often can get confused with this idea that like, oh, you are God. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's even being transmitted through those philosophies, but no, I don't think that's accurate. No, like I think in some ways they might just be saying you should try to attain an optimal, healthy temple. Mm-hmm. This is a very different idea.
Temple is not the God. The temple just allows the God in.
Yeah.
Now, my spirituality, such as it is, it really, really requires a radically transcendent divinity. The idea of like a panpsychic or like pantheistic idea of like we are God. We're all just fingers and we're all finger puppets, and it's all the same hand kind of thing. That kind of like what's his name? Alan Watts kind of thing. It's not really what does it for me. For me, the magic, the miracle, the wonder of life comes from encountering something that's radically other, something that I can't just subsume or assimilate to myself or identify with, something that's there in between, something that's so radically other that there's no hope of identification. But that in itself becomes the moment of communion. It's that we will never be one. if we're only one insofar as we're both standing apart. This is what Plotinus, the great Neoplatonic philosopher, he called it. He was actually quoting an older Neoplatonist named Numenius, I think, and what he said was that the goal is to be alone with the alone. I love that, alone with the alone. Mystical union as a kind of encounter with radical alterity. I find that much more, for me, I mean, it's just what moves me. That's what I like. And so the artists can never attain to that. In a way, the artist encounters that radical otherness in the work. Right? There's a sense in which you can never really claim ownership of your work if your work is good. It's good because it's not you. You can't take credit for that part of it that makes it great isn't your responsibility, isn't something you put in. It was something that emerged on its own, and that you should be proud and honored to be able to put your name on that. But ultimately, it's bigger than you, right?
Yeah, you shepherded it.
Exactly.
That's all.
Yeah,
I actually think you achieve great objectivity when you. That's another shift I had. It allowed me to have greater objectivity when viewing the work, when acknowledging that I received the idea.
Yeah,
because my ego wasn't tied up in the quality of it at that moment, or even the nature of the idea. I read my comics and I'm just like. It doesn't feel like I made them. I don't know what they're about half the time. And I'm okay with that now. I'm okay with it in general. Of course, it enters a human realm in which there's going to be interpretation. And you have to be all right with that. I think there's like I think the pressure we're putting on that type of responsibility, although I understand it, is creating less art in some sense. Mm-hmm. There's like a restriction at play. But
I like what it does, that attitude of seeing the work as kind of like not really up to you, is you end up looking at it from the point of view of like a craftsman. How is it made? Does it stand up on its own? Does it work? And that kind of more humble way of approaching the work, I think, first of all, it completely dispels the idea that you're some kind of like genius. Although there are geniuses, we've had this discussion before. Yeah, there are people who are master craftsmen, but that's what they are, master craftsmen, who do something that no one else has done. And but that happens in carpentry as well. It happens in all kinds of lowly, quote unquote, arts that nobody's like followed the history of in the way they have with painting or whatever. There is genius, there is brilliance, but ultimately it seems to me that no matter what your art form is, even if it's dance, like in dance, it's just you, right? But it's you and the body, you and your body. There's always a material that you're working that will not allow you to simply do whatever you want or assert a kind of omnipotence. The material always resists, and also the ideas resist, and the ideas and the material impose their will on it. I mean, Carl Jung has a beautiful theory of art. He's like, for Carl Jung, it's an inversion. The artwork chooses the artist and finds a way, chooses the right artist to come into the world through. So the artist is simply the soil in which this plant that is the artwork grows. Maybe that's a little too much, but the point is that this encounter with something that's bigger than you is baked right into the artistic process, in my experience and the experience of many artists whose words and thoughts on this I've read. And that's okay. And that dispels the old romantic, Byronic, like artist is God thing. But it in another way, it emphasizes the divinity of the art itself. Art becomes more divine when the artist becomes merely the midwife that brings it into the world. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, in respect to, I think we have to talk about podcasting.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, there's got to be some plugs.
I feel like an expert in this one.
Yeah.
As a writer, I feel very, but podcasting I can talk about.
Do you think of yourself? I hate the word podcaster. Don't really like it. And I came to remember, it wasn't even a thing I came to find out recently, that it's just related to iPods.
Yeah.
It's so bad. I
know. And who even knows about those anymore? Yeah. Yeah.
No, but I mean, I think, again, I think I want to highlight, well, one, the weird, because the weird matters to you.
Mm-hmm.
But podcasting as a medium, and as we're having a podcast, I think it's relevant. But what it allows you to do.
Yeah.
And also, well, collaboration, there's a lot to talk about there,
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. I never thought, I had no interest in podcasts when I started this project with Phil. Phil was into podcasts, and it was his idea that we should start a podcast because we had this crazy correspondence. We were writing each other 30,000 word emails. Like, I'm exaggerating a bit, but emails that were several thousand words long, and over a couple of years, and we would just we found that we had so much to talk about, and we would talk on the phone, have these productive, really amazing, creative conversations. And he was like, I think we should start a podcast. I never thought of it. I had no interest in it. I liked radio at the time. I listened to, this is only like 2016, 2017. So I would listen to like CBC in Canada. So I like the idea of talk radio. I never thought of myself doing that. But weirdly, my mom had, a couple of years before that, had gone to see a fortune teller, a psychic, or a palm reader. And this person, she asked this person about her two sons, because I have a brother. And this palm reader or tarot reader, I don't remember what their medium was, said some really crazy stuff. And one of the things that she said was, your oldest son is going to be talking to many, many people. And at that time, I was just simply writing and directing TV. Everything, wasn't doing anything public. And then she told me, so she says, you're going to be speaking and lots of people will listen. I said, that makes no sense. There's no road there for me. What am I going to do? I'm going to become a public speaker, a politician. I don't know. And it wasn't until we had the podcast and it started working, I'm like, oh my God, that's kind of what I'm doing now, talking. I never thought I'd do that. I'm not someone who, I love having conversations, but I never saw myself as a public speaker. I was very shocked to do that. And it was because of Phil that I did it. But then when the podcast kind of took off and found all these listeners, and that was the second big time in my life where the ball came back. It was like, holy shit, this is something we need to be doing. And so I got interested in the medium and what it is to podcast, what a podcast, essentially it's, McLuhan writes brilliantly about how technologies work, right? So you'll have a technology, it'll become obsolescent. And then a new technology will come. And then the new technology will produce a new environment in which the old obsolete technology can be revived in a new form. So essentially, like, the best thing about radio for me was talk radio. But there was less and less and less of that in the late days of radio, right? At the end of the 20th century and the first decade and a half of the 21st, radio was going down. And then podcasting came, and basically, just to me, what it did is that crystallized that one aspect of radio that I loved. I love stuff like Art Bell, like Coast to Coast AM, that sort of that late night radio thing. Except that, of course, podcasting is usually not live, but long conversations. I always thought, wow, I like listening to long conversations. That allow themselves to meander and explore things. So, it's the one redeeming quality of our age is, I think, podcasts. Not that I listen to many of them, But I do love the ones I listen to. I really, really love this medium. It's a lot of fun. Yeah.
It was worth all the irredeemable things.
I don't know if it's worth it, but at least there's that.
Kidding.
Yeah.
No, but so when you think about weird studies,
mm-hmm.
like, do you guys sit down and try to think about where you want that to go? I know, for instance, you had a larger project about the tarot cards, which is a very large ambition.
Yeah.
So there I started to see like what would you say? More challenging framework there.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we don't really treat it like that. We forget that we're doing it. Then, oh shit, it's time to do another tarot episode. We do it very informally. In fact, Solvatur ambulando, it is solved by walking, has been our motto since the beginning. So when we started the podcast, kind of funny because we recorded the first episode, I think 2.5 times before we had something we were happy with. And then we actually recorded like 10 or 12 shows, if I remember correctly, before we even started putting them online. So we had a bunch in the can, and then we were recording. We were like months ahead of where the show was for a while. And then, of course, eventually that just fell apart. So, but the very first attempt we made, we had a kind of structure. We had a section for letters from listeners, and we had like segments, and some people, like one of our model podcasts, like I consider them to be mentors because it's by listening to them that I learned how to do this to a certain extent, is A Very Bad Wizards with Tamler Summers and Dave Pizarro. It's a psychologist and a philosopher who have long conversations, but they still kind of segment it. They have a main theme. They'll talk about one thing at the beginning, then Phil and I, we quickly realized that the structure thing did not work at all. What we needed was like anti-structure, total anti-structure. So we just pick a topic. We didn't even discuss it before. At first, we were exchanging notes. Like, these are my notes for the topic. And what are your notes? Oh, okay. We'll see how this works. And pretty soon we realized that all we need is a topic. And even if we don't quite have the same idea of what the topic is, that's fine. And then we just meet and then we just have a conversation. And the great thing is that at first that made for long, messy conversations that we had to edit down to something, presentable. But now we kind of have a sense of the shape. So there's very little editing at this point. We just clean it up and take out some of the ums and ahs. But it's the spontaneity of conversation that made our show what it is. So it really is kind of, it is what it is, and we're just, for some reason, our dynamic makes that work. But we had to learn not to try to impose any structure on it.
Right.
And that took a while. But that makes it great. I don't think we'd still be doing it otherwise. We would have burned out. Yeah.
I'm trying to think, is there an episode that, I'm trying to imagine a listener who doesn't know who you are.
Right.
And they want to encounter your most distilled achievements. One is art or reclaiming art, right?
Yeah. For me personally, yeah, I guess. Yeah. Yeah.
And then in respect to weird studies, is there an episode you think that stands immediately out?
We just had to do that today, actually, Phil and I, because for reasons to be discussed later, we had to find an episode or two that really represents the show. And at this point, we have 150 episodes. So it's hard to choose. I for some reason, my mind always goes to the episode we did on Raiders of the Lost Ark. Maybe it's because I'm particularly proud of what I came up with for that one. Maybe that's all it is. I like to think that it's actually a strong episode. And what I like about that episode is that it's exemplary. I could easily say, we did a show on the movie Under the Skin, or we did a show on Twin Peaks, or all kinds of weird stuff that you would associate with the name Weird Studies. But what I like is when we find weird stuff in classic mainstream media, like Raiders of the Lost Ark. I think we found some really cool things there. And so for some reason, I find myself recommending that one. Now, I haven't listened to it in a long time. We do have an episode that we did late last year called On Weirding, where we kind of like talk about what it is we do on Weird Studies. What does it mean to weird? So we kind of just borrowed the logic of what happened in academia with queering, queer studies, and just like applied it to the weird. What does it mean to weird something? And we talk about that in that episode. So that's a kind of conceptually appropriate introduction. But really, I just recommend that you just go through the list and pick something that you know. Like we did one on John Carpenter, which I'm really proud of. We talk about a bunch of John Carpenter films. So I don't know. I don't know what's the one I recommend the most. Just
if there was yeah, that's fair. I think that's good. That's what I did.
Yeah, exactly.
If there was a weird academy, who would be the architect, you think?
Like the actual architect of the building?
Yeah. I'm imagining Weird Studies as a place to go to study.
I don't know. I think you know that I'm a huge fan of brutalism, so I would want to get. I think he's passed away by now, and I forget his name. I
love a good keyboard sound.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
No, I did.
Yeah, Raymond Moriyama. Raymond Moriyama would be the architect of the Center for Weird Studies.
Okay.
He is an amazing Canadian-Japanese brutalist architect. He did the Ontario Science Center, which is one of my favorite buildings. I'm a big fan of big slabs of concrete, big monolithic things. I'd love for the Center of Weird Studies to be the most grotesque, gigantic, brutalist edifice ever erected. So that would be the architect. But I don't know if you meant architect figuratively.
No, I know. I meant literally.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just started to imagine an actual academy for what you're trying to do.
That seems to be like, since we started this show, and I don't know what part we've played in this, the term Weird Studies has been gaining currency in academia. And now there are conferences, Weird Studies conferences and symposia. There are people who put Weird Studies as an area of a field of expertise on their CVs. I'm not an academic. I have nothing to do with that world. But to me, Weird Studies, the whole concept is a contradiction in terms. You can't, what's weird can't be contained in a particular study program or field. It's the weird is what eludes this sort of thing. So it's kind of funny to watch Weird Studies become an actual thing in the academic world. But I know there are rumblings. There is rumor of something like that on the horizon. It's possible that one day something like that comes into being, and that would be funny. What I really do believe in, though, and what I hope that we can contribute to making happen, is a revival of real parapsychology, like real research into the paranormal. I think that's it's been derided, of course. It's been laughed at. It's been mocked. It's been underfunded. But there are people who have developed methodologies and modalities in that world who deserve to have their legacy be recognized and picked up by new generations. And I think that there's a lot left to discover there. So if the idea of Weird Studies can encourage people to start looking again at psi phenomena, parapsychological phenomena. I mean, now there's this crazy UFO disclosure stuff coming, like this whistleblower. I'm sure you've heard of the latest one.
No, I'm strangely completely uninterested in aliens.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why.
Yeah, that's fine. There is the latest kind of development in that world is quite spectacular. So looking at weird things and taking weird things seriously, taking the weird as a kind of category of thought and experience seriously, I hope that we've contributed to that a little bit, and I hope that continues. But a Weird Studies center would, to me, be a kind of like Monty Python-esque development, which doesn't mean it can't happen, doesn't mean I wouldn't support it, but I think it would be funny.
Okay. I think that's fair. I just like imagining it.
Yeah.
Do you feel that you're weird?
I've been told I was weird. I used to be, when I was living in Toronto, my nickname was JFO, because I was constantly talking about weird stuff. I don't know. I decided early on, I believe in everything. I just, if you ask me, am I interested in Sasquatch? Yeah. So I'm super interested. I'm interested in aliens. I'm interested in ghosts. I've had many experiences of that type. We didn't talk about that, and that's fine. But I've had a lot of weird experiences. I've seen it, like we were saying earlier, I've never had like a vision from God, like telling me what to do with my life, like build an ark or anything like that. But I've had a lot of completely inexplicable and completely unexplainable experiences. When I was 12, I was part of a major UFO sighting, like with 20 kids, this gigantic, obvious flying saucer right in front of us. So that was a big experience for me. And that was just one example. I've experienced poltergeist phenomena. I've experienced sleep paralysis of the most kind of dramatic variety. I've experienced, of course, lots of psychedelic experiences, synchronicities. Like it goes on. I'm forgetting a lot right now, but so I don't know why I've always been drawn to that world and have always been rewarded for my interest by having weird shit happen to me. So I guess in that sense, I'm weird, quote unquote, but I think that in my life, I'm pretty normal. Yes, there was a period of experimentation with psychedelics that ended a long time ago. I live a very sober life. I don't even smoke weed, and I live in Canada where there's literally a weed shop on every corner. So
you're in it. It sounds like you're now. Yeah. It sounds like you're in it.
I guess so. Maybe.
No, it's just like there's some weird, you got palm readers prophesizing your podcasts.
Right.
You're in some current.
Yeah, I guess it is. And when you're in it, it doesn't feel that way.
Yeah, because from my perspective, I don't see ghosts. I don't see UFOs. I'm not in it. I'm not in that current,
I'm not in it anymore either. I don't see that stuff anymore. Actually, that's not true. I think I've told this story in your presence before. I had 2 crazy out of body experiences during the pandemic, which were like ridiculously intense. And one of them, my wife witnessed. She saw me out of my body. So it's weirdly corroborated. You talked about this. Yeah. So I'm not going to tell the story again. I don't think, but it just so
I like people not knowing the context.
Yeah.
I enjoy
they don't
that.
Need it. But that was the latest. That was a few years ago. Since that's calmed down, so I don't know. It's so strange to think about this. I was never afraid of being seen as weird. I remember some of my friends, we were having discussions when teenagers, and it seemed like being seen or singled out as weird was a problem for people. That was never a problem for me. In fact, I would have been ashamed if people didn't think I was a little weird when I was a kid. And I'm not proud of that. It's like, it's another form of, but so, yeah,
I agree.
Guess so. I guess the answer is I was a weird person.
The desire to be on the fringe, to be on the outside.
The conviction that there's something out there that's astonishing that people haven't figured out yet is my generous and charitable way of interpreting it. The conviction that there's something that people don't realize is the case. And that when I find it, I will be astonished. And if they come along with me and if they see it too, they too will be astonished. There's something about this reality, this world, this existence of ours, which we haven't yet we haven't yet metabolized and just like shelved somewhere. There's something yet left to discover. And I've never been much of a physical traveler, like someone who wants to climb Everest or like go mountaineering or deep sea diving and all that. That doesn't holds interest to me. I guess this brings us back to the beginning, is interior space, like going into the realm of dreams and visions and madness, and going as close to the abyss as you can without stepping over the edge, or maybe even stepping over the edge and realizing that you still have just one toe, on the cliffside, and just allowing yourself to go inward into those zones, those imaginal zones that are, from one perspective, they're inside us, but in a way they're just as external as outer space. They're just as alien and other. I like exploring those places. And that means exploring ideas, exploring means reading, but it means most of all, reverie, dreaming, just finding what could be the case. It occurred to me at some point that anything that you can think of is, by virtue of its thinkability, possible, and therefore the possible is always real. So even the most fantastical imaginings have a kind of reality. There is a world in which those things exist as you imagine them. And since there's only this world, that means that there is some pocket, some corner, some zone of this world where these fantastical things are the case. And I like to dwell in that realm, that place, that zone where these other realities present themselves as parts of our reality.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to end it. Call to interiority.
Yes.
Hope you enjoyed tuning in. Music by Dori Vivarsky and Mingja Chen. Next up, we have Zach Fishman. Until then.